Hey, you've tuned in to Cisco Unplugged.
Hello, and welcome to Cisco Unplugged. My name is Kharem Espinosa, coming to you from Houston, Texas, and I am part of the Cisco Wireless Center of Excellence for the Americas. Quick reminder that we are also live on our YouTube channel. Please join us at youtube.com/@getunplugged. And also, don't forget to register for upcoming sessions at cs.co/getunplugged. Our topic today is Catalyst 9800 configuration best practices. And to cover that, I am joined by our expert, Dan Weaver from Richardson, Texas. Hello, Dan, and welcome to Cisco Unplugged.
Hi, Karim. Thanks for having me.
Of
So,
course.
sorry, go ahead.
Quick thank you as well to Leo Lorenzo. I know, Dan, that on our team, Leo was helping as well prepare this content, and he couldn't be here today, but we wanted to say a big thank you. Before I give it to you, I just want to remind everybody, if you have any questions for our speaker today, please use the Slido application with the details on your screen, and we will get those questions answered for you. With that, let's get on with the show. Dan, let's get unplugged.
Thank you much. So, when Leo and I started talking about the configuration best practices, we realized that was an elephant, and how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So, when we started looking at, what best practices actually are, I mean, they're a summary of years of experience of real world deployments. This is based on everything from attack cases to partner engagements, um, to just how the system was intended to be used. And so it drives a lot of our information. Now, the thing about it is our configuration guide, I went and looked at a curiosity. I believe it's 2,420 pages long for the newest one. The best practices guide is 116 pages long. And it's only that short because there's a lot of links to other content that's out there. So that's a lot of data. So Leo and I said, well, how can we pack that into a 20 to 30-minute presentation? There's no way. So, we can't do that. So, little spoiler alert, we're going to start doing these more and more. So throughout the Unplugged, you're going to see more and more specific configuration best practice sessions. If there's something that you guys want to see, want to hear more about, please put it in the Slidos on the surveys so that we know what to focus on. So one of the things about Leo, and the reason why he was so critical to this piece of the puzzle, is he came to us from wireless TAC, where he specifically worked on 9800 series TAC cases. So he had a wealth of a background of what he saw with customers and partners. So I asked him this very simple question. I said, well, Leo, what did you see were the most common things that people were struggling with? And so these are, non-scientific. It's just, him kind of thinking back to his years of experience. And we came back to, people were struggling with understanding this new configuration model. And I understood that actually because I'm an old school AireOS guy. I've been working with AireOS since Airspace was acquired by Cisco. I've done all sorts of deployments in every environment imaginable. So I understood that. I remember when the 9800 was introduced, I was a little bit confused. I didn't really understand everything by it. So I asked, the question, at that time, well, why are we doing this? So the biggest reason we're doing this, we did this, is to simplify things and to remove some of the limitations we had in AireOS. So now we have this concept of, a modularized configuration. And the biggest thing is it removes a lot of the inheritance, and we'll see that piece of it specifically. But the best part of it for me is that easy day one configuration. And how can you actually add sites by leveraging your existing configuration? So I asked the question again, being an old school AireOS guy, why couldn't we just, bring this capability into AireOS? And that's a little bit more complex of a conversation. So AireOS is basically a monolithic architecture. So it's a single-threaded process, but those threads have multiple interactions with each other. So that's actually the reason why we had issues trying to bring in ISSU, for example, or AP device packs or service packs, is because of all the interactions between all the threads. Whereas in the 9800, we decoupled a lot of that. And now there's individualized containers so that we can actually restart individual processes. We don't have to worry about When we, do an AP device, or sorry, a service pack, we don't have to reboot the entire controller anymore. We may only have to reset the APs that are specifically affected by that device pack or that service pack. So that gives us a little bit more flexibility in how we can, operate the system. It also, because it's multi-threaded now, we actually have more throughput capability. We have through the processor, and that really becomes important when we start looking at the next piece of it. So I'm one of those type of guys that, again, I'm old school, so I like to play the game of this is like that. So when I start learning new technology based upon technology I know, I take what I know and then try and find a correlation. So all of us who have been working with AireOS for the years, we're familiar with the WLAN tab, and we know everything that's in there. So we have, our basic configuration. What's the SSID? What is it being broadcast? What radios is it using? Things like that. And then we had more advanced pieces of it. Where we could tune coverage hole or our timers, quality of service. I mean, so our network policy for quality of service came in. Our switching policy. What VLAN is this SSID being mapped to? What are our security settings? Now, I know I saw scenarios where I had customers that wanted to be able to do, the same SSID at multiple sites, but some sites wanted to be Flex Connect, others they needed a local mode, or they needed a different QoS policy, and it became kind of difficult to manage that piece of it. So what we did with the 9800 is we decoupled that and modularized it. So now you see we'll have our WLAN profile, which has those same basic wireless settings, and it has our advanced wireless settings, again, things like timeouts and stuff like that. And it has our security policy. But our policy profile, that's where we're doing our switching. So if we're doing Flex Connect, that's where we set it there. And also our quality of service pieces. And what that gives us the ability to do is not create a new WLAN for everything, just create a new policy. And we'll see that piece of it. So then the next piece is, RF profiles. So, that's something we've had in AireOS for years to be able to tune our networks. So, whether it's RRM, data rates and the such, we still have those same concepts in AireOS. I'm sorry, in 9800s. So that's almost a one for one, but there are a couple of differences I'll show you. But then I asked the questions, like I've gone through the 9800 and I was like, well, I don't see things like a whole lot of global settings, or where I would set things like primary and secondary AP controllers, or turn on SSH, or set my login information for the access points. So I don't see that really in there, and I don't see flex groups for sure, and I don't see AP groups. But I point these two out for a specific reason. If you look at our WLAN, we're already setting on their network policy, and we're setting switching policy, and we're doing security. We're also doing that in flex groups. So which one overwrites the other? Then you look at AP groups, similar concept. We have those policies pieces of it. We're adding our RF profiles. So then we have some of the site-specific settings. So again, we have a lot of duplication. So we don't really have those concepts in there. So we have our AP join profile and our flex profile. So AP join profile is those site-specific settings or global settings, things like your primary controllers and such, and then your site tag, which is where we start to apply flex concepts, and we will see that. So the question I always come back to is, how can we leverage this? What does this really give us? So let's use the case of KesCorp. You've heard us talk about KesCorp before. They are a fictitious company. In this case, they're opening their multi-site retail environment. So they're going through doing a refresh. In this particular scenario, they've got their first site up on a 9800. It's been deployed and everything's working great. And they had some requirements as they started to plan out the remainder of their sites. They wanted to use the same SSID at all locations, period. Same security settings, everything. They did not want to change that. Now, the different sites had different other requirements. Like Site 2 had a situation where they couldn't change the VLAN information and use their standardized VLAN that they use at Site 1. That was already being used for something else, and they couldn't change that. So they needed to use a different VLAN there. Site one's and site 1 and 2 will be local mode, so everything coming back to the controller. At site 3, they had local internet, they had a bunch of local services. They wanted to use Flex Connect there. And then they've already developed a RF policy, and they wanted to be able to leverage that across all locations. And when you think about AireOS, that could, there's a lot of different ways to solve that. But let's look at how we can solve that with the 9800. So in here, we've got our APs up, and we're going to go over to our advanced tab of the wireless setup. And this tab shows you the process. It shows you the interaction and all the different pieces that you need in order to configure your 9800. So your different policies, and then your different tags, and then applying them to the access point. So let's look at what that would look like in real world. So let's go to the WLAN profile. We've already discussed the WLAN. They want to use the same WLAN profile at all locations. So, oops, sorry about that. Hit the wrong button. Apologize. Bumped the button on the come on. Let's see, can I fast? All right, sorry about that. So this is something I recorded earlier because some issues I was having earlier today. So anyway, we'll go back through that. So this piece of it helps you understand the process. So we go through all the different, you notice there's things like the site policy there is listed as optional, and the radio policy is optional. Those can be, you can use defaults. We'll talk about the limitations there. So again, the same SSID with the same security policy throughout all locations. So we don't have to touch this piece. We can reuse this one. However, VLAN Site 2 did need a different VLAN. So that's where we would go into the policy profile. So what we're going to do is we're going to take and copy the KES Core policy profile being used. We'll give it a name that ties it back to Site 2. And then we will only change the access policy at that location. So we'll change just the VLAN. So you'll see that it's VLAN 12 now. We're going to change it to VLAN 24 and apply that to the device. Everything else is being left the same. We're not changing any other settings. So now that we've got that policy profile built, now we need to create the policy tag to tie it to those two together. So again, we'll copy the existing one. We'll give it a name. And then all we will do after we name it is we will change the policy profile. So currently it's pointed to that policy profile, the corporate one. We're going to change it to Site 2. Little trick, you do have to check that checkbox. Otherwise it won't work. It won't save. It took me banging my head in the wall a few times for that. The AP join profile, again, we don't need to change that because it's set. It is global across all their locations. And since they're using Flex Connect, they're not using Flex Connect at this location, they can use just the standard default Flex profile. However, there's something we're going to talk about later. We will create a new site tag for them. And general guideline is each site use a unique site tag, and we'll go into the details of why that is. But we're not going to change anything else there. This is where you'll see we'll change it to Flex later. And then here's our RF profiles that they've already created. And I couldn't move this keyboard. Sorry. Oh, come on. Sorry about that, everybody. Let's see if we can fast forward that a little bit. Get back to where we were at. So here we are. They've basically just disabled some data rates, and they've tuned RM a little bit. So here's our APs where we start to tag them to the access points, tag all these settings. You can see Site 1 has their default, has their global policies that they've created. And then you see that Site 2 has the default policy tags. So these APs are basically brand new right out of the box. So we just select the 2 access points from there, and we go through and select the specific tags specific to that site and click apply. Now I'll tell you, you'll see at the top it's success. It was able to apply that. Those APs will disappear for a minute or two as they take their new configuration. So you probably don't want to change things during the middle of the day. So let's move on to Site 3. Again, we're going to reuse that same SSID with no changes. But remember, this one we wanted to use the same VLAN, but we wanted to use Flex Connect. So we do have to create a new policy for them, because in the policy profile is where we disable or enable central switching of the SSID. So again, we'll give it a name, and then we'll go through and we will disable central switching on the right-hand side. Since they have local services there, we're also going to go ahead and disable DHCP, and we're going to leave the VLAN the exact same. This is a site that is going to meet corporate policy, except they're just going to use Flex. So again, now we have to go through and create the policy tag for them. We'll name it and just change the policy profile to the newly created policy profile for Site 3. And again, check that checkbox, otherwise it will not save, and then apply it to the device. So now our AP join profile, again, that does not change. They're using the same controllers, the same settings. However, we do need to change the flex profile. So in this case, we're using the default profile, but we're going to add a new one specific for Site 3. We'll give them a Site 3 name, and you'll see we're going to change their native VLAN. So they have a different native VLAN at this store. So we now need to tell them, just like in Flex groups, we need to tell the controller about, or the AP about, the VLANs that are there. So we still need to add VLAN 12 to the Flex profile. Then we'll go through and we will tie the site tag, create a site tag. We're going to clone this one, and we will call it Site 3 site tag. And you'll see we'll leave the same AP join profile, but then we want to deselect that enable local site so that we can get to the Flex profile. We'll select that Flex profile and drop down into that, and then apply to the device. Again, RF profiles, none of that's changing. We're using the globals. So now we can go through and tag our APs. So we'll see, Site 3's APs, they're all the defaults. We'll go through, we'll tag those to the appropriate policies, or the appropriate tags. Again, these APs will disappear for a couple of minutes. So let's go back to what this really references. So this is, again, the configuration model and what the different pieces of it really relate to. And this all how we're pushing the policy to the access points. So again, our policy tag that defines our broadcast domain, basically the list of WLANs that will be advertised. And we still have the same, guidelines, no more than 16 max, or no more than 8, depending on the AP. But really, we need to follow our true best practices, which we'll have as a follow-up of, no more than 4 or 5 WLANs. Then we have our site tags. You'll see, again, that's where we, do more of our global configuration from the AireOS world. And also, that's where we set our Flex Connect up. You'll see there, prior to 17.8.1, the max Flex APs per site tag is 100 for seamless roaming. That's directly from AireOS. That was our limitation the entire time. After 17.8, that's been increased to 300. So you can have a little bit larger Flex deployments now. And then obviously we have our RF tag, which is basically the combination of the RF profiles, similar concept we had in AireOS. So let's go back and check on these APs. So it looks like they're back. We have all 9 of our APs back. So now let's go and look at what their configuration is now. So we'll go over into configuration, and then wireless, and the access points. And sure enough, all of our APs are there. And if you look, at Site 1, you can see they are local mode. And let's look at what their configuration is. So you can see that they have that corporate policy, with, in this case, just the one SSID, and that SSID is being mapped to VLAN 12. They then have their, the Site 1 site tag, and it's using their default AP profile. And then they're using their corporate RF tag. So this is exactly what we expected to see for this site. So let's go and check on Site 2, since it's back up now. One thing I did notice here was that this one here does not have any 6 gigahertz. And this is because they're all 3802, so there's no 6 gigahertz. You'll see that also on Site 2, because those are not 6 gig enabled APs. So you look, this one is using the Site 2 policy. So everything is basically the same, except you notice the VLAN. The VLAN is mapped to a different VLAN, just as the requirement said. That we're still using our Site 2 site tag, and we are still have the corporate RF tag. Then if you look at site 3, you'll see the APs are in flex mode. If you look over to the right, you'll see AP flex mode. And so let's look at what their configuration looks like. Oh, and you'll see that they are going to be using, again, that same WLAN profile, but they have their own policy, and it's mapped to VLAN 12 just like Site 1. Now, but you look, the site tag is different. We have that AP join profile, but we also have this flex profile with the native VLAN 45. And you notice in this one, because we have 9166s, that 6 gigahertz policy shows up. So in this case, in this time, these APs are ready to start servicing clients. So you heard me say we recommend doing an individual site tag per site, and there's a reason for that. So this, quick little refresher on how AP distribution works prior to 17.9.2. So it was, it was based upon the site tag. And so the first AP to join in a site tag would get assigned to a specific WNCD process. So it was done in a round robin fashion. So what does that really reference though? And so each 9800 has a specific number of WNCD processes in it. And so it depends on which controller model gives you the number WMCD. So obviously the larger have up to 8. So what this means is that in the case of like a 9800L, you can use that default site tag. Now, you'll hear me use the term religious a lot. I believe there's a lot of religion in IT. I personally don't like to use any defaults. So even if I'm using the same settings as default, I personally will create everything unique. The reason why I do that, by the way, is so that if I ever mess something up, I can always go back. I can always see how things were from directly out of the box. So if you look at any deployment I've ever done, I never use any defaults. But that's, again, a religious thing. So as you start planning out your deployments, you start planning out your sites, keep in mind, it depends on what type of controller you have. Now, what we recommend is you keep the math simple, and you try and match the number of site tags that you use, mathematically lining up with the number of WNCD processes. So in the case if you have a 9808, try and use at least 24. So that way that everything is spread across those evenly. So quick little, on how we used to do this stuff. So the way it did before, as I said, it was in a round robin. So it was all dependent upon the first AP for each location to join. So you can see what you see here is we end up with a scenario where the AP site tags are being equally distributed across the processes. But what happens if you don't have an equal number of APs in those? So you end up with a scenario where you can have one WNCD process is oversubscribed, or it's carrying more of its fair share. So what we did in 17.9.2 and later is we added in the concept of load. So now we can set the load. And if you think back when I was showing you creating the site tags, if you remember at the very bottom, there was a load option there. And so we have that capability now to add that part in. So now what will happen is when you select that, it will base where it places the APs based upon the load to evenly distribute them across a WNCD. So how do we choose a load? So the default load is 0, and that's what we have in our example before. So there's no load indication, so it will use the previous way of doing round robin. But if we start to develop that and start using that load option, the most common one we're seeing right now is doing it based upon office building or areas for large buildings. So in this scenario, one floor or an entire building gets a site tag, and it'll get put into a WNCD process by itself. So most customers in that scenario they're doing the load equals the number of APs for each site. We also have the option of the weighted option, and this really comes in handy in high density deployments where you have a large number of APs, but even a large number of a larger number of clients. So the idea here is that we can tune it to balance out that process. So if you look at the difference, what it ends up with is it starts to move these AP groups into, or these site tags into different WNCD processes. So in the end, we end up with something that's balanced. So this is pretty balanced. Obviously, you have one big site in there, but now is a much more balanced scenario. So again, prior to 17.9.2, that was added in as a fix, or added as a feature in that version. So prior to that, it is basically a round robin, and so it's the first AP joining for each site tag. After that, it will do it based upon the load if you have configured that. One thing about that, if you want to use the load, you do have to reboot the controller. So you can configure the load in advance and then reboot the controller at a later date. But in order for the load to actually take effect, you do have to reboot the controller. So links to everything that I've discussed are here. So I don't like real long URLs. So I took pity on everybody and I created some short URLs for everything we're doing. Again, coming up next, we've got a couple more sessions already planned out. So please join us for those. And again, we are going to start doing more and more of these best practices ones. If you have something that you specifically are interested in, some of the examples that we've heard already are things like HASSO, customers wanting to, what's the best way to do that, or the best way to do software upgrades, software upgrades, whatever it is, drop us a note. We'd love to put it together. We are going to work our way all the way through the best practices over the next several months. So look for us there on the YouTube channel, and look forward to seeing you again. Back to you, Kharem.
Thank you, Dan. The Q&A has been on fire. Thank you so much to all of our panelists answering those questions for everybody. I don't think we have any question pending. We'll take a look and make sure we get back to everybody. But thank you so much, Dan. Everybody, please also complete the short survey on your screen right now. It's a couple of questions. We really appreciate your feedback.
Yes.
Reminder as well to follow us at YouTube, youtube.com/getunplugged. And look out for more episodes that will be added pretty soon to our registration, cs.co/getunplugged. If you want to get a hold of us and our team, we have a whole team of experts in our Wireless Center of Excellence that you can reach out to through your account team, your Cisco account team. See you for our next episode on Advanced Visibility for Cisco DNA Center. Thank you for your time, and until next time, stay connected and unplugged.